Hello and welcome to the practice on Lessons in Excellence, the Indian Story. With me, as usual today, Piramal. Geeta, sharp as ever.
Thank you.
And of course, joining us is Ajay Piramal, chairman of Nicholas Piramal, and the person who has certainly made or perfected the art of the corporate acquisition. And that's where we begin, Geeta.
Ajay, normally growth takes place either through organic growth, through alliances, diversifications, takeovers. Nicholas Piramal has grown through largely the takeover process, even though there has been organic growth, etc. Can you take us through how you identify a company? Can you take us through the process?
I think first, the most important thing is to understand what strategy you have in mind and really to create a strategy.
Acquisitions, a strategy at the very core of Nicholas Piramal's meteoric growth, transforming it in a single decade from a late entrant to one of the leading players in pharma. It all began in 1988 with the acquisition of Nicholas Laboratories.
When we acquired, Nicholas itself was an acquisition. And at that time, when we were looking at it in 1987, our group was primarily in the textile business. And as we looked forward, we realized that the textile business was not a sustainable business in a composite mill. And therefore, we had to do some diversification. We were scanning the horizon, and we thought that we needed a sunrise industry, and pharmaceuticals was one. So that's how the origin of the acquisition of Nicholas took place.
So as Geeta asked, that issue of what is it in a company that excites you about acquiring it? The 2 or 3 key things.
Well, Nicholas, what excited us, one was that it was a multinational which had strong brands. It had strong systems. And underlying, there was a strong company, but it was not performing for various reasons, one of which was that its parent, Sara Lee, had no interest in pharmaceuticals, and it was too small for Sara Lee in its overall turnover.
Have you always looked for these things in every other acquisition that you've done, brands, the potential to improve the company's performance by a little bit more management focus, which may not have been there? Are these the key ingredients?
It really varies once again. In 1993, we were looking at an acquisition of Roche. And there we knew that in future we needed access to technology, access to new brands. And that's why when we acquired Roche, we had a long-term arrangement with them that we would get access to brands. We also realized that in Roche there was a lot of assets which were really not contributing to the bottom line and was just heavy in assets. And therefore, it depends on each company. When we acquired the research center of Herx, for example, at that time we wanted to get a leg up in the research of pharmaceuticals. You must realize that we entered pharmaceuticals only in 1988, and most of our competitors, whether multinational or Indian, had been there before us for maybe 15, 20 years at least, and therefore we had to do this catching up. And
therefore you never looked at organic growth as an option because of the very limited time span that you, as you say, you had to build up the business to a critical size?
No, it's a combination of both, because you just can't grow in acquisitions alone. Once you acquire, you have to then push organic growth. So it's a combination of both. Otherwise, it would not pay off in acquisition.
Let me just take you to a concept. Some companies are acquired just to create value. Others are for empire building, value capture. Either you want to get the size or you're getting it very cheap. You've mentioned some of these issues. At the same time, you also have the concept of creating value, that you've decided, I want to be in this business. You're buying a particular company because there's a gap. You mentioned the technology. But can you take this, explain this to us a little bit more?
Ours has been a combination of both value capture and value creation. And if you look at it, when we first entered the pharmaceutical business, it was really a new business, and we knew that we could create value out of this.
Excites a question for me at this point. Obviously, your need to grow is there, but how come, was it fortuitous that you got so many opportunities, or do you always have a team looking at these things. How do you synchronize your need with the environment opportunity?
It's not fortuitous. I think there is a strategy which is crafted out, and we have to implement the strategy, and that's what we've been doing at every stage. So for instance, our first major acquisition after Nicholas was the Roche acquisition.
In 1993, Nicholas Piramal bought out Roche's Indian operations, a result of homework that began 3 years earlier. In 1990, Piramal set its sights on expanding its product portfolio and on Roche. When the opportunity came, no one was more ready than Piramal, a result of its proactive acquisition strategy.
I don't think it is fortuitous. Whether we have a team always looking at it? No. Earlier we did not, but now frankly we have. But since then we've not yet made an acquisition.
You haven't made an acquisition. Now, go back to this. Let's go back to this, Roche. You said you had a need and you started a dialogue with the company. At that point, when you started the dialogue, did you have any sense at all that they could be potential takeover candidates, or was it an investment of time just blindly hoping for the best?
Actually, it was an investment in looking at a totally different business of Roche, which was the diagnostics business. We were looking at, we knew that Roche was not present in India for diagnostics, so we started talking to them about what we could do together in diagnostics, and therefore we didn't have an idea that Roche would exit out of the pharmaceutical business, but when they started thinking about it, I think to some extent I can say that we influenced the way of their thinking.
That takes me to another question. How important is it to understand the seller's motivation?
I think that's perhaps one of the most important things. You've raised a very important issue, and I know that you all have written about it in managing radical change as well. And to understand, to really go into the shoes of the seller and understand what his motivation is, and then to kind of create a win-win situation which satisfies both the seller's needs and the acquirer's needs is perhaps the most important.
Typically, what motivation would sellers have? Sometimes they would need cash, therefore they need to get out. Sometimes they've just lost interest in that business and therefore they need to get out. Sometimes they've lost interest in the unit, if not in the business per se.
Let's stick with the Roche example.
For Roche, its Indian operations was a BCG matrix dog, a low-growth, low-market share business, contributing a mere 0.3% to its global profits. But Roche wouldn't sell till it was sure its brand, products and export commitments were secure. Nicholas Piramal, with its established credibility, was clearly the best suitor.
Those were the two most prime driving factors for Roche, and therefore the credibility of the buyer, the trust that they could have in the buyer was much more important to them than any value. Or
so in that negotiation, those were the attributes that you, in a sense, emphasized upon, not so much the price at which you were going to buy them.
Yeah, in fact, we said price was secondary, and the price was actually discussed at the end. It was not even discussed. It was all these issues which were really discussed, and we got agreement on all of these. Because, frankly, at that time, there were many people who were willing to pay a much higher price than what we were willing to do.
Give us an example also of a buy that you've done where the motivation of the seller is somewhat different from this. Perhaps somebody who just needed to cash out. How do you then approach that negotiation?
We've really acquired most of our companies, or almost all our acquisitions are from multinationals, and therefore cashing out alone is not the consideration. It's never been. But they're always concerned, well, price is important. Let's say in Ron Polanc. Ron Polanc, there was a tender process. So they were inviting bids from several people, and therefore, of course, price was important for them. But equally important was how you would deal with people. And since Ron Polanc had several minority shareholders, it was equally important that how would you handle that process of minority shareholders? Would you give them a fair deal? And that's what we could demonstrate. once again in Ron-Polanc, even though it was a tender, and we paid actually less than what the highest bid was. And the bids were not only from Indian companies, they were also multinationals at that stage.
And that's because A, the fact that you had a track record in the business and track record of managing acquisitions, and the fact that you made all the commitments that they needed for you to make.
Others were also willing to make the commitments,
So
but what was more was that our track record of keeping to our commitments. Also, in the case of Ron-Polanc, we had had other dealings with them. Ron-Polanc was part of Aventis, and Aventis had sold their research center to us, and then we had stuck to that, not only every word in letter and spirit of the agreement. So all that helped.
Let's go to a slightly more technical question. That here's a buyer, here's a seller. Now you've got to, and you've understood the motivation, you know the price you're willing to pay, you've done all the homework. How do you enter the negotiation process? What kind of people do you have in place? Are there teams? Or what kind of people within the teams?
You know, I think, though you said the negotiation process, I just want to highlight that a little more. I think there is, in any negotiation, we need to understand both the needs of the buyer and the seller, and very often I find that what may be very valuable for the buyer is not so expensive for the acquirer. In other words, there is a lot of things which we very often leave on the table, and if we can somehow manage that.
Give us an example.
I mean, again, let's say
Take the price example.
let's take a price, or you take the example, let's say, of the research center. When we acquired the research center, here was Aventis, which had 25 years they were in research in India. And they had built all these scientists, they had very close relationships with them. And I think for them price was not important, but it was more important to have a commitment that these scientists would be well taken care of. And for them that was the primary importance. And they thought that probably we are acquiring it for its assets and all. But we understood their motivation. And for us as well, it was important that we retain these scientists. So we could really get a win-win situation in that. And I think this happens all the time.
We've seen examples in several takeovers where if there is the potential CEO of the acquired company within your team, there is a bridge, there's an understanding, there's a clear mandate that if I take over, this is a cleaning up that's needed, and I am making a commitment that I will do it.
Yeah.
Does that happen in the takeovers you've been involved in?
Yes, it has happened, not always, but it has happened. For instance, we acquired the pharmaceutical business of ICI early part of this year. And therefore, at that time, our COO of Nicholas was fully involved in the business. He made a study and said that this is what would be the savings that he could realize. This is where he could grow the top line. And he was totally committed to the process right from day one, and actually then has been able to deliver that.
Well, you know, negotiation theory, which Geeta has also written about, it tells us that it's best to have these two teams. One is the operating team, which will ultimately have some role in running the company and therefore becomes excited about the takeover. Yeah. But it's always good to have the restrained team, which is really looking upon it very clinically from the outside, is not really getting emotional about the takeover, and therefore can take a dispassionate decision. Is that something that you've practiced?
Yes, we have practiced that. For instance, in this case itself, the CFO and let's say corporate counsel were on the side of the people restraining it, and I was also taking a sort of more balanced view. The operational people were more excited about it and felt that it was a good opportunity. So that's very important, to really step back and be able to resist, because, you know, I think a lot of acquisitions go wrong because of ego. It's really the ego of the person at the top, and therefore, you know, let's bid a little more and go on, and this has happened times immemorial. I think there is a classic case where we had once come to an agreement with a company with a particular transaction, and then there was this other large pharma company which came to hear about that transaction, and actually, without doing any due diligence, without looking at the business, whatever our offer was, they, I think, offered sometime 1.5 to 2 times more than what we offered. And I think that acquisition has not paid off for them.
While Nicholas Piramal competed with the best in the industry and acquisitions for its critical path, it never took its eyes off a crucial process, integrating the new acquisition into its fold.
You bought the company. Now what do you do?
Normally when we buy the company, there is a certain strategic reason for which we've acquired it. And then really the first thing to do is to see how we can integrate it. Look at what are the value drivers in the company, what is really creating value and what is destroying value.
Let me just come at it from a completely layperson's perspective. What is it that you would do, let's say, in the first 60 days? I mean, you come into this company and you are the acquirer, and everybody, the employees, the vendors, everybody's looking at you and saying, here's the new man. My destiny is now in his hands. So what do you do? The first few things. Do you go and shake up things? Do you go and make large-scale changes?
No, first of all, what we do first is really communicate with the employees of the company that we're taking over, why we've taken it over. And normally there's a good reason why we've taken it over. And fortunately, by now we've also established a track record of what we've done with the past acquisitions. And I think by and large we tell the people that we will follow a process which will be fair. We'll follow a process which will really grow the company. The only reason why we acquire a company is because we want to grow it. So we really have generally an invest and grow mode. It doesn't mean that we don't ask people to leave because there are certain areas where there is surplus. But we communicate that whatever we will do will be fair and in the best interest of the company. By and large, I don't believe in posting, our own people, because we believe that whatever we have acquired are also our people. So whichever company we've acquired, we've not immediately changed people. There is integration and some people may be surplus. But we've been fortunate that we've been growing pretty rapidly. So you always need people. And we try and relocate them. Sometimes if there are two people doing the same job, we may try and craft each one's job. It's not necessary that they all stay. We acquired, for instance, the ICI Pharma business only on 1st April this year, and we've completed the entire integration in 5 months, which is a sort of record. We acquired Ron Polanc and we did the entire integration in 9 months. In Ron Polanc, within 9 months, we do not have a single fixed asset which the original Ron Polanc had, which really goes to show that there was a lot of surplus assets which were available in that company, and we had to find a way of really deriving value of something which was just sitting on the balance sheet and not doing. And
so
therefore,
not a single fixture. You're saying no land, no building, no machinery, all
so, yeah.
gone.
So we really looked at the office. We thought it was too big, and we actually did not need so many people. So we had a voluntary retirement between the head office people of Nicholas and Ron Polanc together. We did a study and found that there was surplus. So we asked a few people to leave, and we had this large office building which we sold out. We had 2 plants in Ron Polanc which were actually not creating value because the cost of manufacturing there was much higher than what we were doing in Nicholas. So we closed down the 2 plants. We had several depots and all that which could easily be merged with Nicholas. So we closed those down. So that was one part of the integration. But the other part is that we kept the sales force and the marketing separately because we thought that that is where the value will actually come. And therefore, in fact, we invested there in terms of getting better people or more people, getting newer products, and that is how we grew it. We looked at integrating the IT, the accounts, and the purchase, the systems. We had some processes that we had in Nicholas which were perhaps better than what they were in Ron Polanc, and therefore we incorporated the best-in-class processes between the 2 companies.
Well, and that pretty much seems to be it, Geeta. Covered off all the issues.
For now.
Yes. Ajay, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for being with us today. Stay with us through the series as we come in with the next episode of Lessons in Excellence the Indian story.